This is the video where I'll be painting Treebeard the Mighty and the amazing new plastic kit from Games Workshop. So join me after this. Hi folks, how's it going? Steve here as per usual. Thank you for joining me in this video. If it's your first time here, please do click the subscribe button, and if you like the content and click the bell, you will be notified every time I release a video. So this is a painting guide that is kind of out of my comfort zone. Painting ants is something I've always put off. Even in my own collection, I've always put it off. Just, you know, I never wanted to do the basic paint brown, dry brush a couple of shades lighter and boom, done. I always wanted to go a little bit special, but never really knew where to start or how to go with it. Then last week, Warhammer TV released a painting guide, and Peachy did an amazing job on Treebeard the Mighty. And in this video, it is very similar. I've used Peachy's recipe as pretty much my base plate to work from. There's a few little changes in there, but I want to see if I can replicate what Peachy did on Treebeard, because I really like the result he got. And it gets me playing with contrast paints, which is something that I don't do that much. I use 2 or 3 contrast paints religiously for my basing and shading and things like that. But other than that, I don't really touch them. So this was exciting for me. I ordered the contrast paints and the paints that I didn't have from Peachy's guide. And yeah, either follow along or just watch the video through and see how I ended up. There are a few changes that I did for my Treebeard. There's just a couple of little things that I wanted to pick out, or things on my model that I wanted to stand out a little bit more. But basically, I wanted to see if I could do as good a job or as close as damn it to Peachy's paint job. So thanks Peachy for the painting guide. It was amazing, and I learnt loads from it, to be honest. I didn't think I would, but I did. I learnt loads whilst painting it. You'll find that yourself when you're painting it. Watching the video is one thing, but actually putting the paint on the model, the contrast paints especially, you'll pick up little things that you think, oh, right, okay, so that does that and that does that. And, you know, things like going on, doubling up. So painting your contrast paint on and then going back over again with the same contrast paint, because it's a transparent paint. You can intensify the colour of the paint by going over in layers. And it's a good way of getting your brain thinking on how actual layering works when painting. Anyway, I have waffled enough. So please join me over at the desk and we'll get painting Treebeard. See you in a minute. So straight off the bat here, I did go slightly different than Peachy did on the Warhammer TV video. I zenithal highlighted, so I did start off with Mechanicus Standard Grey and then just highlighted through the airbrush, or you could use a normal brush, with Celestial Grey, the topper edges, the parts of the model that I want to be a lot lighter. With using contrast paint, I thought this would have been a very good method to do that. We're then covering the entirety of the model with Skeleton Horde contrast paint. Again, this is okay, straight from the pot. This, not mixing it down, straight from the pot, getting it on the whole model. This is the model now completed. We'll leave that to dry and move on to the next stage. With that done, we now move on to snakebite leather, and snakebite leather is a way just to get a little bit of definition in the darker spots on the model. So this is really personal preference as and where you want it. It's just a little bit darker than the Skeleton Horde, and just like I say, it adds a little bit of variation and it's more natural. If you look at tree bark out in the wild, there is no pattern to it. It's all very, very random. So just sort of add this on where you think. You can't really go wrong at any of these stages with the contrast paint. And, you know, you can always go back and re-add different colours if you're not happy when you get to the end of the first few stages. But you just, for me, I thought, well, where's it going to be darker? So in and around the back where the branches are, underneath the backs of the legs, which the way he's walking would be underneath the body, the underside of the arms, etc., underneath the beard, and some of the creases on the face. So we'll add this, let this dry, and move on to the next stage. And here you can see the different variations. I'm going to start adding Plague Bearer flesh now, contrast paint. First off, I'm going to give anything that is going to end up green on the model a little bit of a touch up with the Plague Bearer flesh. just to give that a bit of a, like I say, starting off the base colour for greens. And also then just dotting it in and around, and as Peachy says in his video, you know, it kind of replicates the look of like a sap or things kind of leaking from the bark, etc. And it is a nice touch. I mean, browns and greens, they're such natural colours and they go really well together. They mix in well together. I'm adding these contrasts before the previous contrast has fully dried, just so that I get a nice blend. Again, this is personal preference. You don't have to do this. You can just let it dry fully in between stages. I chose to do it just to, like I say, to get that blend. So anything where it's mossy, anything where there's leaves, I'm touching up with the green and then just dotting it in and around the creases, just to add the variation and make it look more natural. So I'm going to do this over the whole model, and then we'll move on to the darker colour Militarum green. So here we can see where I've added the Militarum green as well, a lot of the beard, and just darkened up some of the leaf areas as well, just to add a bit again, just variation to the shades of the green. I don't want it looking too basic, if that's the right word. I want to add a bit of nature in there, and there's a lot of variation in nature. So from there we move on to Cygor brown. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm picking out the open areas in the bark where you can see sort of the inner wood of Treebeard's body, and any bits that I want to end up looking a lot darker than the others. So I do again some on the inside of the beard, and a little bit in and around the face. The open ends of branches that are snapped off, I do similar, just to add a bit of shade and a bit of definition to certain areas. Not being too neat, because you know we're going to sort all that out at a later stage. But yeah, that's the majority of the contrast base work done. So straight from Peachy's tutorial here, making sure that all the previous base coats of contrast paints are fully dry. We're going to move to the dry brush stage, and this is where the model really starts to come to life. So we'll start off with Baneblade brown. If you've got dedicated dry brushes, please do use them rather than using a normal brush. It's just so much better. Here you'll see me using the Artist Opus Series D, which is just kind of the daddy of dry brushes. This is the extra large that I use, and I use smaller brushes as I proceed through the stages of dry brushing. Straight away you can see that this just accentuates the design and the sculpt. It brings out all those different sort of textures to the bark, and it just already looks amazing. And we do this all over the model, especially paying close attention to the extremities, so the fingers, the elbows, the knees, around the bottom, around the face, and things like that. And then we move on to the next colour. So we move on to Karak Stone. Karak Stone is a little bit lighter than the Baneblade, and this is again just to accentuate and highlight and make those really amazing details pop. It really is worth saying that when you're dry brushing is not a shortcut. Dry brushing is just another technique, and it's well worth taking your time with if you want to achieve really good results. Having the right brush, like I say, using the Series D here, really does help. Also, with the way that Peachy does it, for me, it's more of an overbrush than a dry brush. I found that a little bit of moisture really does help. You don't want a chalky effect on Treebeard. You just want to really highlight all the detail. So yeah, Karak Stone everywhere, again paying extra attention to the extremities, fingers, elbows, knees, and details on the face and the branches above his head that come out of his back, just on the tips of those. And then we move on to Deepkin Flesh. Again here with the Deepkin Flesh, it is basically just a little bit of repetition, just going over slightly lighter than you did previously on the areas that you want to pop out. Paying particular attention here to the face with the Deepkin Flesh, picking out all the details. There's a lot of detail in there. You don't want it wasted. You want that to pop out of the model. He's got a really characterful face, and it would be a shame not to have that as a really good focal point on your model. You can probably notice that I'm going down in sizes of the brush, so I'm using a smaller Series D here, and that's just so I can get in and around now. Especially at the back, it's quite difficult to get a wide brush in between the branches, so I'm using a smaller brush just so I can get into them points and make sure that everything that needs to be highlighted is highlighted. Sticking with the Deepkin Flesh on my palette, I'm getting a fine detail brush, And I'm just going to pick out some of the detail on the face, again, just to make it pop. Just in and around the nose, tips of the nose, the eyelids, and things like that, because we really want this to show off the effort that's gone into the production of this model. It's a fantastic face, straight out of the movie. So I'm just making sure that I highlight every little bit, and I'll highlight other parts as well. I'll pick out bits of the beard and other things that are just you know, just to give it that bit of depth and make things pop. There's a little snail shell that I'll base coat in the deepkin flesh, but I'll end up finishing that in a slightly different colour. But yeah, it's entirely up to you how far you go with this. I found the left eye quite difficult to work out exactly where it was, because of the overhang, but you'll get there. If you start dry brushing, picks out the detail, it really helps you see what's what. So now we're on to picking out the actual greenery on the model, the moss and the leaves. And again, straight from Peachy's guide, I'm starting off with some Lorraine Forest. Now, I do kind of veer off the guide ever so slightly here. I do everything that's green in Lorraine Forest at first. So the leaves in and around the model and everything like that, all the bits of moss on his beard. And then I'll start to add differences to the leaves. So rather than all the leaves being one colour, I'll switch them up. I'll have a different colour leaf next to another leaf, and things like that, just so it doesn't look too uniform. I want to try and avoid that at all costs on this model. But we're going in with Lorraine Forest first, just touching up the leaves, touching up the moss. Again, there's no need to worry about being overly neat, as long as you don't, you know, get any of the green on where it's, you know, the bark or anything like that. There's so much variation in this model, you can afford to just get the paint on there, because we're going to start using contrasts in a minute. We're going to add more contrast, and we're going to use that as a shade, which I will come to now. So now all the Lorraine Forest is on, we are back with Militarum Green. It's a really nice contrast paint, this. I can't believe that I've not actually tried it before. We're using it in a slightly different way. We're using the contrast paint here as a shade for the Lorraine Forest. And I must admit, it does work really, really well. It just adds a nice tone. There's a lot of variation between the two colours. So I'm going over most things that have Lorraine Forest on. Not everything, because in a couple of stages time I'll explain why. But we're going over everything that I want to be the base coat of Lorraine Forest with Militarum Green, making sure we get a nice coverage, and we'll let that dry, and then we'll move on to the highlight. The highlight for this, as advised by Peachy, is Strachan Green, and it's a great combination, works really well. So I'm going to pick out all the leaves in his beard, and what I try and do is paint very finely, like a V shape on the tip of each leaf. I make sure that I've got a nice point on my brush. I make sure that the water's thinned down enough. I also make sure that there's enough water in my bristles, so I don't, once I've got the Strachan Green on my palette and I've mixed it down to the consistency I want, I don't go in with a dry brush. I make sure there's water in my actual brush bristles, and it just helps it to run a lot easier off the brush and keep it nice and neat. So I'm highlighting everything here, as you can see. On the leaves are little V's, and then on the moss I'm just stippling, which is just little dots, and it just adds a really nice detail, and it just makes it pop really nicely. So we'll go over all the areas that I want to end up being this colour, and then we'll move on to the next shade of green. So the next shades are base coated in Warboss Green, and this is where it just ever so slightly differs from Peaches. Not much, you know, you wouldn't notice the difference that much, I don't think. But I just didn't want all the leaves to be exactly the same green, so that's why I did some of my leaves in the Lorraine Forest, and I'm going in now and picking out like every other leaf in the Warboss Green, and we'll go through the Warboss Green technique of base, shade and highlight. And all that is for is, like I said, I don't want all the leaves to be exactly the same colour, all the moss to be exactly the same colour. I want to mix it up a little bit and just add that little bit of variation when you look at the model, especially from the back. There's a lot of leaves on the back, and I just didn't want them all to be exactly the same. So again, once I've base coated all the Warboss Green, I'm hitting those up again with Militarum Green. And what this does, using the same shade as the Lorraine Forest, it just ties the two greens together, gives them something that is consistent between the two, and it's just a really nice effect. Really enjoyed it. I wouldn't have thought of doing this unless I watched Peachy's video, And yeah, it's a way that I'm gonna paint greenery and things like that, I think, going forward, because it just works really, really well. So we're going to go in with a Militarum green, shade everything, let that dry, and then we're going to hit it with a highlight. And the highlight for this is Elysian green. Again, it's just a really nice stark highlight. I'm picking up the edges of the leaves, and what I'm doing as I'm going around the leaves, I'm also highlighting some of the previous colours. So the leaves that have the Lorraine Forest base, the odd one I'm highlighting with Elysian green again. So what it ends up doing is, rather than having 2 different colours of leaves, I end up with like 3 different sort of colours. It tricks your eye to make you think that it's really varied. So now that's done, we're going to go in and start picking out some details. So I'm going in with XV88 and all the kind of mushroomy growths that's on Treebeard. We're going to pick those out with a base of XV88. Try and be as neat as you can here. You don't want this to overlap. You want these to kind of pop. So when you put the shade on, you want it to outline the actual growths and really add definition. So you don't want the overspill of the XV88 onto the bark, so to speak. So we're going to do all these in XV88, and then we will come on to the shade. And the shade is Gulliman's Flesh. Again, contrast paint. We're making a lot of use of contrast paint here, which is good. I've used contrast paint more on this model than I have on ever since it's been released, I think. It is quite transparent, Gulliman's Flesh, and you know, for good reason. But what I tend to do here is put it on in layers. So I've picked out all the mushroomy growths, the snail shell in his beard, and I'll go over them with one layer, let that dry, and then I'll hit it again with another layer of Gulliman Flesh. It just adds a little bit more definition, I think. So on to Avalanche Sunset. Here we're going to pick out the actual eye, the whole of the eye. Be nice and neat here. Make sure you've got a really good tip on your brush, and the paint is flowing quite well. It's better to be thin and get a couple of coats in there rather than too thick and obscure any detail. You know, you've highlighted the eyelids already, you don't want to make a mess of that. So we highlight both eyes, and then I'll shade them in with some more Gulliman's Flesh. Again, I'll do this in 2 coats, and it is just to add definition to the actual eye socket, get a bit of shade in there. I think it just adds a really nice effect than just going straight in with the pupil from over the Avalanche Sunset. Whilst that's drying, I mix up some of the Avalanche Sunset with a little bit of the XV88 just to add a highlight, which I then stipple to the edges of the mushroomy, toadstooly type fungusy things. We're then going to reinstate the Avalanche Sunset in the eye, again using a very fine point on your brush. Make sure you do this nice and neat, and after that we can get the pupil in there. I try and get the pupil to the actual top of the eyelid, so it's kind of just underneath the top eyelid. I think it captures the character a little bit more of a Treebeard. It's kind of a lazy stare, but it's entirely up to you. You could go complete top to bottom, but I decided just to have the pupil at the top of the eyeball. I think that looks great. On to basing, and this is entirely your own, what you want on your basing. I go with my go-to, so you can use PVA or whatever glue you use. For speed, I use super glue because the base is so big I'll do it in parts. So I spread super glue on my base using a wooden stick. I then get my mix of very fine gravel, different sizes sands in there. Pop it in, give it a shake around and tap it off, and I'll repeat this over the entirety of the base till the base is completely covered. Once the base is completely covered, I then hit this with another contrast paint, Wildwood, and I get it all over the sand, make sure it all soaks in. I don't base coat the sand, I just go straight on with the Wildwood contrast paint. It's an amazing paint, goes on really well. If anything, I'll thin it down a little bit. This is straight out of the pot. And yeah, just make sure that you get it fully covered so there's no light bits of sand showing through. Once it's fully dry, I use the hairdryer to speed up the process. I give it a overbrush of Gawthor Brown using a flat brush. Now here, don't be too shy with it. You don't want to paint the paint on. You still want it to be an overbrush or a dry brush, but you want to get quite a good coverage. So you might have to do a couple of layers of the Gorthor. You want to really lighten up this base and do it over the front, back, everywhere that you think. All I'd say is you don't want it too dark. Then on from there, I give it another dry brush or overbrush of Baneblade Brown. Getting it lighter every single time. It's adding a little bit of character to the base. And this is just going to be a blank canvas for how you end up finishing off your basing, whatever you're going to use. Tufts, bits of flock, whatever you want to use. I'll show you what I use on this. What is it? You don't have to follow this bit. And then a final overbrush just to really lighten it up of Karak Stone. Again, get this everywhere, and the beauty of using Karak Stone as your final highlight, if you have just smudged over onto any of the roots of Treebeard's feet, that was the highlight that you used for Treebeard on your final highlight of his bark, so you can just go over anything that you've just smudged onto his roots and it tidies that up for you. So yeah, when it comes to basing now, I just basically decorate the base. I use a mix of phlox and grasses and twigs and basically whatever I have to hand. I always find basing, the vision that you have in your head of how you want it to look doesn't always end up being that, and it's kind of a work in progress thing, which I'm really happy with. So yeah, I'm just spreading some glue on. I'm using, I think it's Aleen's glue. You can use PVA, whatever you want to use, Mod Podge, stuff like that. And then I'll sprinkle on some flock from Woodland Scenics. I have a lot of different types. I really like the mixed blend. It's lots of different types of yellows and greens, and just ends up looking really nice once the glue's dry. And it's fairly, it works out. I use this a lot as a base to work from, and I just start adding things, and there'll be things that I like and things that I don't like. You can see here now that I'm adding more glue. On top of that glue, I'll start adding these like little tufts, or it's like a coarser flock, should we say. It's like a sponge, different colours. I actually wasn't too keen on the colours as I added these on, and I ended up covering a lot of it up. I just didn't think it suited the theme of Treebeard and Fangorn Forest. But you know, you persevere, you'll find things that you like and that you don't like, and it's a case of just working with it, really. So I start adding some tufts. This is where it really does start to change for me. The tufts are amazing that you can get these days. There's loads of them out there. If you just search eBay or Amazon for wargaming tufts or railroad tufts, you'll find loads. If I remember, I'll try and put a link to some of the ones that I use, but I have a box full of different kinds of tufts. And this is definitely where it changes the whole feel of the base. So I'm putting these on with glue, even though they are sticky. I use super glue and stick them down. And that's the end. That's how it looks at the end. I was really happy with how it turned out. Yeah, he looks great. Really happy with him. So yeah, basing is one of those things that can make or break a model, I think. The purple's a little bit stark, but you know what, I got it on there. I didn't think I'd like it, the purpley pink flowers, and I really did. I really did like them. I thought it was a nice contrast from all the browns and greens on Treebeard, and I'm over the moon with how it turned out. So first and foremost, I would like to give a shout out to Peachy and his techniques using contrast paint. I learned a lot from it. I thank you very, very much, buddy. And if you haven't seen that video, I highly suggest you go and check that out also. So that's it. I'm really happy with how he turned out. I think he looks awesome. So again, I did say at the start of the video, big thumbs up to Peachy's painting guide. It's an amazing guide, and I always get really excited by the Lord of the Rings painting guides, because we don't see enough of it over on Warhammer TV. So if you're listening, guys, please have more Lord of the Rings stuff on your channel and the painting guides and the like, because they're amazing, and they really help us guys out a lot who collect the series. So what did you guys think? Are you going to do a similar thing? Are you going to copy Peachy's guide? Are you going to do a couple of little changes that I done? Are you going to base yours differently? Do let me know in the comments below. This is a video, the kind of video that I want to do more of. I think if you look back in the back catalogue, I've done a Minas Tirith painting guide, I've done an Easterling painting guide. I'm trying to keep it on trend, so with the releases that are coming out, I'll paint more. I have ordered the new Easterling elites from Forge World, so when those arrive, I may do a painting guide for those also. But if there's anything that you want to see me paint on camera, please do let me know in the comments, and I'll try and make it happen. I pretty much, there's not much that I don't have, but there's things that I may have already painted. I have had a couple of requests for Urukai. If you want to see Urukai painted, please do let me know. So that's it for this video. Please do keep washing your hands, guys. Stay safe, wear your masks, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.